Welcome to Unbound, the podcast where we take you on a wild ride through the world of pop culture and romance, sometimes with our rose-colored glasses off. I am Adriana Herrera, and I write romance full of people who look and sound like my people getting unapologetic happy endings.
And I'm your co-host, Nikki Payne, Black Jane Austen fangirl, author of Pride and Protest, cultural anthropologist by day, and belligerent Wymon by night.
Yours is so much better than mine.
The truth.
All right, so we are so excited. We have been talking about doing this together for months now. And we have, I don't know, like, how did we come together? I feel like we had seen each other online, seen that there was an affinity there, that there were things, thoughts, feelings, views.
Yes. We were circling each other. We had mutual friends that we loved each other. And so we're like, it's something about this.
And I knew for a fact that this could be amazing because I think at some point, a mutual friend of ours, Allie Hazelwood, told me that you had done your dissertation in the Dominican Republic, where I am from.
I did.
And I was like, this is meant to be. This is the person who I should reach out to join me for an unhinged,
completely unhinged. We're apologizing in advance.
Unhinged journey through romance and pop culture and how those things intersect, seen from the lens of two Black women.
Yes. So we know each other, but let's make sure the audience knows who we are. And let's get to know us by pop culture. I have a question for you, Adriana. Are you ready?
Hit me.
You can tell a lot about a person by the first thing they ever purchase with their own funds, with their own monies, their little... the money that their parents give them, their allowance, and then you go out and purchase something that is completely you. Can you tell me the first album, CD, single that you purchased with your own money?
I can, and it was two of them together, and I grew up in the Dominican Republic, so we didn't have a lot of record stores that had it took a little time for the things to come back in the 80s when I was growing up. So, but my dad was traveling for work, and I gave him my money that I had saved up and placed an order for him to buy me the cassettes for Thriller and the True Blue Madonna album. Those were the first two.
The taste.
Yes, and those were my first. I don't have them anymore, but I remember when I was leaving the DR, when I was in my 20s, I still had those two cassettes in my pile of cassettes. Yes.
Quality.
And so I have a question for you.
Yes.
Also, pop culture adjacent. What was the first live concert that you went to?
First live concert. It is a story, okay? Imagine a 10-year-old just grooving very hard to Anita Baker. I was at the Cynthia Woods Mitchell Pavilion, and I went with all of my aunties because Anita Baker is chief auntie music. And I'm 10 years old, and I'm like, caught up in the rapture of love. I did not know what the rapture of love was, but she was my first live experience, and I have loved her ever since.
I absolutely adore that. It is so, and it's also so formative. It's such a amazing artist to imprint to. Like, this is now my standard for what I want from a live performance, a live music performance. Like when you start with Anita Baker, I unfortunately started with Chicago, who were kind of washed up and somehow ended up in a hotel ballroom in the Dominican Republic in 1992. And I went to see them.
I love this video.
With my mom. That was my first one. But just so that we can close the circle, what was your first album that you bought with your own money?
Oh, this is a story. I don't know if they had these in the Dominican Republic, but we had a little something called Columbia House Music.
Oh, yes.
Where you could purchase 12 CDs for just 1 penny. And all you had to do was promise to pay them back, all the, eventually. The problem with like, I actually think they may be defunct because of that business model was really problematic.
It was a
But
Ponzi
I
scheme.
got my, it was absolutely a Ponzi scheme. And so I bought my first album. It was Brandy. It was like the Waiting to Exhale soundtrack, which was a fantastic soundtrack, but I got it specifically for Brandy sitting up in my room, which I played forever and ever. I just thought Brandy was the coolest person. She was so snatched all the time with her little freestyle braids, and I loved everything
She
about her.
was great. I mean, that was honestly like the golden age for like sultry, like luscious black women, and like R&B. The
Yeah.
television in the 90s was immaculate. Like so
Yeah.
many, and I was in the
Yes.
DR, like I was living in the Dominican Republic, and I remember like we had cable, obviously, which is why I speak English so well. And so like part of like living single, like I don't know, so many of like I feel like the very like kind of like seminal pop culture things that like really shaped how I like my entertainment, the way I think about television
Yeah.
came from that time. And I think like Brandy is like one of those like really iconic women from that time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you talk about someone like imprinting on you, like Anita Baker walked so that like Tony Braxton could run,
Yep.
right? Like there was room for someone that sultry and low because of Anita Baker.
Absolutely. Yes. No, I mean, I think that, listen, we're giving like a little bit of like a rundown of like some of the good stuff of the 90s, like Chicago notwithstanding.
Oh, yeah. Please. I'm here for Chicago.
Yeah.
I love dad bands. Between our dads and aunties, like we could have us a cookout. Okay.
For real. Like, I mean, I do feel like I was thinking about like albums, and I think for me, like growing up, right? Like I feel like the album that I always think about as like the central album of my like youth was Lauryn Hill, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill.
Oh, Miseducation of Lauryn Hill was banger beginning to end. Did not pause, just went straight through.
I mean,
I even know the speaking
yes,
parts.
same.
Like, I know the words.
Spiritual soul, like pierced something in me that never like it really was like it was like a watershed type of piece of art for me. And so much of it is the emotion and like the love and the heart wrenching and the heartbreak, and that's and like the way that I think like a woman of color, like a Black woman, love, expresses love, talks about love, thinks about love.
Beautiful.
And so,
and I'm like this teenage girl, like a virgin, never been kissed, and I'm like unsure what the balance held. I touched my belly overwhelmed, and I'm like, I feel you. The decisions.
I feel you.
The choices.
I was 20, so I was in the midst of making a lot of bad life choices with romantic partners at that time. And I felt every single word of that album, like, deeply. So, yeah, I mean, I think this is a perfect segue for us to begin to talk, because I think for me, like, I love, like, there's so much music that's like heartbreak music that I love, but there's a certain thing about some of those like R&B songs from that time, like Tony Braxton, as you mentioned, that like really spoke to specifically like my experience of like how I thought about love and the way love and heartbreak felt to me in particular.
I think the reason why like Lauryn Hill and Tony Braxton and Anita Baker, like we mentioned, imprinted on us is because the perspective matters. It's the reason why we felt like this was going to be a really, really compelling podcast, the perspective of Black women on pop culture. It adds an extra element of understanding, and it moved us. And I think that what we're doing here is we bring our perspective onto romance novels and pop culture events like movies, TV shows, and TV series. I think that the perspective matters.
Yes, the point of view is I think, essential to how something affects you. And like we're both romance readers, have been romance readers for most of our lives. I think at some point we should probably do a podcast about how we became romance readers. But I started reading romance when I was like in middle school, like 12, 13 years old. And so I'm in my 40s now. That's a lot of romance. And a lot of that romance has been about white women, written by white women. And I've loved it. It's been like, it's such an important, romance has always been such an important part of my life. But one of the things you and I have talked about is now that there is so much more to read, how that lens and how the point of view and the positionality, the worldview of the author and the characters they write does make a difference.
It does. It changes extensively what is understood when the reader reads something. Sometimes I'm watching a show or reading something, and I look around and I say, is everyone reading this or watching this in the same way that I'm watching this? And as a cultural anthropologist, I will say probably 100% no, that everyone is having an experience with media that is completely kind of wrapped up in the way that they see the world.
Yes, like their position, their identities, where they're coming from. Like, I mean, thinking about, again, like some of the books that are out now, and just being able to pick out things that are like so singularly culture is something that for both of us, obviously, like we have like picked up on this, that it has been transformative for us to be able to like consume these things that are so singularly about us. And it's a great time to like dive into it deeply, like do deep dives into.
So imagine.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so like imagine all of our kind of quivering hearts when Shonda Rhimes, a Black woman, right, with this particular perspective, picks up an OG romance, right? Like if anyone has cut their teeth on romance the way that we have, we know that Julia Quinn has been writing romance for years. And I was a fan of that Bridgerton series. It was a fantastic series by itself. And then when Shonda Rhimes says, "Oh, I'm going to pick this up," you're automatically like, what is she doing? What's happening? Because you're automatically attuned to know that the perspective here matters.
And there was a big payoff for me, in terms of like the blind casting, the diverse, just being able to visually take in people of color, Black women in particular, like existing in that world was phenomenal. It was just like wonderful to see. And then this year, we got what we're going to talk about today.
Tell us what we got.
Which is the spin-off of the Bridgerton series, Queen Charlotte. So it's the backstory of Queen Charlotte, who we know from the first 2 seasons, who is the Black Queen of Bridgerton. And we both saw that series and were blown away, shooketh, reborn, healed. I felt like I was healing, and I was like being reborn at the same time with that series. It was just phenomenal, and we thought it was the perfect way to kind of launch these conversations that we want to have about the importance, the value, the impact of gaze and lens when it comes to pop culture and romance, and how they intersect, how they work together. Something that we were talking about when we were kind of like planning is that like there is no romance without pop culture. Like romance is very enmeshed. It's like if you want to know what is happening in a moment, read a romance novel. If you want to know what's in the ether, what's in the atmosphere, what the zeitgeist is.
Zeitgeist. I love that word.
In a particular time, pick up a romance novel and you will get like, they always have the pulse of the culture. And so,
absolutely.
Right? And so with Queen Charlotte, as with Shonda Rhimes, who knows like exactly what she's doing and is also always so on point when it comes to like what's timely, what's relevant.
Yep.
It's just like the perfect place for us to start having these conversations about,
I agree,
point of view and love stories.
Can I admit something to you, Adriana?
Please do.
I was afraid to watch this.
Same.
I was like, I want to like this, but I don't want to. I was like a romance heroine. Like, I'll never love again. I was afraid to watch this. I had read a lot of think pieces. I was online, watching Twitter and like watching people watch this. And I was about to stay away.
Me too. I was ready to stay away. Like, I was, okay, it's Shonda. Like, I'm curious. I really love the character of Queen Charlotte from the first 2 seasons. That actress is phenomenal. So I was like, I want to, but then the think pieces started coming out. And I am in a text chat group with a few other romance authors who are also Black women. And we were all just like, ooh, like, I don't want to watch something that's going to be like traumatic or that's gonna like give me there were a lot of think pieces that were really like not like giving kind of snippets out of context, and it was really making me scared that it would not be the experience that I was hoping it was.
And this just like speaks to the way that Black women consume media. There's this way that we almost have to like protect our space. Like when we're watching something and it's like, is this going to be okay to engage with? And you almost come into situations tentatively. If I don't want to, bring up a painful time in my past, but I was obsessed with this show called Sleepy Hollow. And if you've ever watched Sleepy Hollow, then you know that Black women are like struggling. I mean, even New Amsterdam is a great example of kind of like what they do to Black women and their joy and their story and their arcs.
We were scammed. We were hoodwinked. We were bamboozled.
Yes. This.
We were scammed, hoodwinked.
We were scammed,
and bamboozled.
They hurt us.
They truly did.
They hurt us.
We should do another episode.
I feel like if I say the word Sleepy Hollow in a certain group of people, they're just like, oh, everything just explodes. But yeah, and it's because of that that I was treading very lightly on this. I'm like, I don't want to see myself like fall in love with a story, with a character, for them to decide that she's expendable,
to be hurt, or to have, and this is something going off of the experiences that we have in the past. Like, we have a large body of evidence of the kinds of stories that we have been served, specifically like when it's like period pieces of how Black women are portrayed in those stories. And a lot of it is a lot of trauma. And so I did not want, I just didn't want to be disappointed, because I was thinking, if this ends up being where like the 2 first stories were able to be okay, and then the story that is like centering Black women is going to be like a lot of trauma and a lot of strife and a lot of struggle, then that's going to be like really hurtful to me. And so thankfully, one of my friends bravely was like, I'm going to watch the first episode and I'll report back. I'm just going to sit and watch it.
Brave soul.
And I was like, okay, just let us know. And she was like, y'all, I loved it. I'm going to watch the second one. She was like, I loved it. And she watched like the first, if you have watched the first of Bridgerton seasons, you know that it is very easy to sit down and watch the first episode and just watch all the episodes in one sitting. So she ended up watching like the first 3, and by the third episode, she was like all in. She was like, this is phenomenal. I love everything about it so far. And the romance is like hitting. So I was like, okay,
Yes.
I'll do it. And then thankfully, I watched it and I absolutely loved it. I absolutely loved it. And we are going to talk about all the reasons why at length.
Oh, yes. Same thing happened to me. There was a scout who went out ahead of us and said, I'm going to watch this. And then she came back to report, it is good. And then like everyone in our group watched it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a kind of a testament to just how much we have been hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray by like other shows that promise us like a Black female lead with like a love story. And then we end up like on the floor, that knowing that it was Shonda Rhimes, we still had our doubts.
We did.
And Shonda Rhimes like can deliver.
She has before.
She does. Like when
she gave us that one scene of Annalise Keaton taking off that wig on primetime TV. I mean, that was the wig pull off heard around the world.
Yeah. I mean, Shonda, and that is again what like just like having that experience of having been disappointed. Like we really are in that place where like we don't want to be disappointed again with television or a romance that ends up not doing what we need it to do. And with this one, honestly, like I mean, I have like one note for that entire show.
Oh. Let's start at the beginning. How did you like the way we were introduced to this character?
I loved it. And I think that it set the tone for what that show was going to be, which is why, I mean, I love the romance in the show. I truly thought it was perfect. But what I loved the most about this show was that it was centering women's lives, specifically Black women. And
there we go.
Their agency, how they negotiated it, how they got it, how they protected it, how they negotiated it. And so to me, how they introduced us to Charlotte in that moment where she literally is like about to be sold into a marriage, and how she reacts and how she takes off from there, to me was just like perfect.
Okay, tell me why. This is a scene that stood out to me as well, because there was something so impotent about her anger that she overhears her brother signing her off in marriage, and she overhears it just kind of by happenstance, by serendipity. And she can't say, I will not marry. She can't say, I cannot do this. She can't say, like, this won't happen. She just pushes over an expensive piece of art to show that she is there, to show that she is enraged, and to show that she is like alive and an actual person. And to me, it's honestly the cry of like so many women of color is like, I am here. I see this happening. And sometimes my rage is impotent. And that's like, I feel like that was something that stuck with me for that very reason.
Yeah, same. And I mean, even like that monologue that she gives when they're in the carriage, and like in the first episode, they are like going to where she's basically going to go get married off to the, King of England, sight unseen, just gets there to be married. And just talking about what she's wearing, and like she's wearing a corset that if she moves the wrong way, like it'll puncture her lung. And like she has a line that's great, that just like, oh, the joys of being a woman. Like she's like, I am trussed up. I'm getting sold off to this guy. I've never seen him. Like, I'm suspicious that something's up with this guy, because like we're this like tiny little place in the middle of nowhere in Germany, and how did I end up being the one that he wants to marry? Like something is clearly wrong here. And again, to me, just her giving us that sense that like she's no dummy. She could stand up for herself if she's allowed to do so. And she is aware of like her situation, like her self-awareness. I think that to me is something that is so invaluable, and I get so much out of a heroine that is self-aware.
Oh, and here's why I fell in love with her in episode 1. And one of the things that they do with her in like clothing is like she's sitting there like in the carriage trying not to move. And she gives this fantastic monologue like you mentioned, but it's about constriction. It's about her being unable to move out of the position that she's in and that she is angry about it, right? So she's doing two things. She's talking about clothes and she's talking about herself, right? And finally at the end when she's like going to make this choice, trying to decide about whether she's going to go over the fence or stay. When she decides to stay and not go over the fence, she changes outfits. She changes clothes. And I think that says something about what she wants her life to be, either full of constriction or full of choices that she's making and having her own agency.
Yes. And that's also something that I loved. Like, I mean, again, like to me, like Shonda Rhimes was giving us a lot of layers. Like, I think if you watch it, like, I feel like this is the kind of show that you need to watch more than once because you could miss some of the things that she's trying to do.
Agreed.
Because, like, I feel like one of the things that she talks a lot about, and specifically for women of color, is like Black women and brown women, is that we learn very early on that you have to be pragmatic and you have the choice. You have to make the choices that you can when you can, and you cannot hesitate.
Yep.
And I think that like that's part of like she like again like the moment she makes the decision that she's gonna go through that marriage, she like draws the line in the sand. Like, okay, I'm gonna do this, but I'm going to wear the dress that I want to wear.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's this one scene that was like the kind of beginning of a girl friendship where Lady Danbury like looks up at her from the rafters. You can almost see that character make a decision to be about that other woman.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can almost see it wash over her. And I think sometimes it can take that like for a Black woman to look up and say like, okay, I see this one person in this situation that we could never hope to be in. And I'm going to do whatever I can and root for this person to make sure that they kind of stay where they are. So there was this moment of like, I see you and I'm gonna see about this.
I mean, and I think, I mean, that's a kind of great segue to going into the piece of like, we talked about the first couple of Bridgerton series or having seen the first 2 seasons. And one of the things that Shonda did with the series that is not part of like the original text is that she created this world where like Black people and people of color were like part of the aristocracy. And so in Queen Charlotte, she kind of gives us the context or how that happened. And it happened because King George married Queen Charlotte, who in the series is a Black woman. And so part of like how Shonda kind of gave us, like rendered that for us, was putting Lady Danbury in the scene, who was like basically there to look out for these people of color who were all of a sudden made aristocrats and made nobility. And to me, that like that piece of the story is, to me, I think the key of like how stories with Black women at the center are, I feel like, singular, or not singular, but like very, like it's a theme that I feel like is a common one in stories about Black communities or brown communities, is the piece of you can't just think of yourself and your own survival. Like survival for a marginalized group isn't an individual thing. It's gotta be survival of the of the community, of the collective. And so Lady,
oh my gosh,
right?
This is fantastic. I just want to bring in like a literary example of this. One of my favorite books, is canon at this point, is The Color Purple. And one of the first mistakes that Sophia, who was this really spirited, lively woman, the first mistakes that she makes in friendship to Celie is that when Harpo is asking her for advice, about what to do, and not Harpo, but like, she's asking for advice, and Sophia says, well, you should beat her.
Yes.
Right. And she's essentially saying, like, this is my experience. This is what I know. And then when she comes back to her friend asks her, this wounded question, to say, like, why would you do this to me? Like, why would you say this? And Sophia did not even know, right, that it was not an okay thing to suggest. And the reason why I bring this up is that, like, the extent to which uh, having a character in who understands, right, that you cannot you cannot live and think about yourself as the only person having this experience. And it was one of the last times that Sophia kind of thought about only herself and her own experiences. She ends up kind of growing as a character, but that was her biggest flaw.
Yeah.
Right, is that she was about Sophia,
Yeah, and the piece of, like, and I mean, like, I talk about this a lot in terms of, like, how I write feminism in my books. Like, I think one of the things that has been the most detrimental about the feminist movement is this idea of, like, gender equality without, like, equity in, like, other, like, systems of oppression. Like, this idea that if women are able to get in the room with the men and, like, play their games, that somehow we're going to gain ground. And, like, what we do is we're just, like, pawns of,
Yep.
like, a system that's not meant for us to thrive in. And I think,
yes,
like, that's something that, like, it's very clear to me that, like, Shonda Rhimes is functioning from a place, at least in this story, of, and I mean, she does that also in, like, Scandal, where, like, Olivia Pope just, like, takes down, like, sexual predators or whatever. But, like, it's the piece of, like, Lady Danbury, like, being there to remind Queen Charlotte, like, you are the first of your kind. We are all depending on you. This is all very tenuous. They gave us these titles, this land, this security, this generational wealth because of you. And if you don't play your card right, we will lose it. And then we will lose this like one thing that could make everything different for generations to come. And she doesn't let her lose sight of that. And Lady Danbury, like, I feel like that's one of the things I love about this show specifically, that Lady Danbury, like, is faced with difficult choices where she has to choose between what she wants for herself or the things that will allow her to have power that she can use. And she always makes the choice that benefits more than just her. So stay with us, because we're just getting started. The myths are unraveling, y'all. And what we find beneath might just change everything.
Y'all, I am so excited to sit down with Amanda-Rea Prescott today. Amanda is a freelance entertainment journalist on the Bridgerton beat, and she's here to give us the inside scoop on all things Bridgerton. Her specialty is tracking UK TV with an eye to racial diversity discourse. She's a regular contributor to Den of Geek, and her work can also be found at GBH Drama Club, History Today, and Doctor Who magazine. Her scholarly articles, yes, she's a scholar, have appeared in ABO Journal and the Journal of Popular Television. Amanda-Rea has also been a guest on NPR and podcasts like Reality Bomb, Wibbly Wobbly, and The Thing About Austin. She currently lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. Amanda, thank you for joining us.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. I have kind of listened to y'all off and on, so I'm like glad to finally be here. Yay!
Okay, Amanda, we have to start off with the hard-hitting questions, as you know. Okay, the first thing that we want to know is, what was the first piece of music? It can be a concert, it can be an LP, it can be a cassette. What was the first piece of music that you spent Amanda-Rea's hard-earned dollars on. Your money, not your parents, your money.
Okay, so this is gonna sound very. I'm gonna date myself a lot here. By a lot, by like a whole lot. So, in whatever year Smash Mouth's All Star came out, I bought that album with my parents' money.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was like 19, what, 8, 7, something like that. The second one was Brian Setzer Orchestra's The Dirty Boogie. So that was the second album.
I was gonna say, tell us about that, like a little bit about that journey. Did British music get you into British TV, or
it actually did? Here's the funny thing. So here's the funny thing. I was always into British TV because I grew up without cable in the 90s.
Yeah, PBS, right?
Yeah, so PBS, like, I saw Alex Kingston's boobs at a probably tender age. When I was able to really start, like, going all the way into, like, paying attention to it was, oddly enough, around when House came out. So,
yeah.
I went...
Can I also, like, clock this? But it's interesting that House, which is actually an adaptation of Sherlock, right?
It is, yeah. It is, yeah, that's the thing. Like, a lot of people, I don't think clocked that at first, that it was a Sherlock adaptation. I did not see the full version of Jeremy Brett's Sherlock until, like, which was what they were kind of basing it on, until, like, way after, like, the Cumberbatch era one and documentary happened. Netflix and Amazon in their early days kind of just had a lot of BBC stuff on there, and then it kind of slowly went away. Licensing and all that. So, like, not during COVID, like, we have all these billion streamers. There was a lot of time to, like, for me to go back and, like, look at the quote unquote classics and touch notes. I went back and rewatched a whole bunch of the all the Jane Austens I went through.
As one does.
As one does. That was one. All the Dickens ones I went through. I went through several other like, you know, and then so I ended up finding new things to like.
Bridgerton in that list of new things to like.
Yes, it is. Bridgerton was on my list in terms of, like, I'm going to cover this as a journalist list. It started with, I talked about blogging about Downton Abbey. The next big one after that was Poldark. I kind of had a bunch of Tumblr, Twitter blogs getting kicked out of fandom groups for stirring trouble and uncomfortable references. That's honestly where I really started the diversity kind of work on, was...
Amanda, isn't that how I met you? We were getting kicked out of that Jane Austen group.
Well, that's the story. So this is where the journalist part of me sort of comes in. So
yes,
yeah. So around 2015 or so, I decided to go to grad school for journalism. So I went to Columbia Journalism School, as one does when you're like, I need to pad my resume and get a new skill. So that's what I did. So I literally used my Downton Abbey blogs in my application to Columbia, and it worked somehow. Yay! I know, right? So, yeah. So,
there you go, kids.
I looked Poldark a lot. Then I went online and started talking to other fans about it. Had a problem because this was sort of like, okay, there's a lot of older white women on this group, and then a lot of older women of color who are probably from more conservative backgrounds.
Oh yeah.
And then the story has some misogyny, old-time misogyny mixed with, like, World War II, post-World War II era misogyny. But of course, every time I start talking about these issues with fans, it was very obvious that A, they had very little understanding of, like, anything related to feminism at all. It was a lot. B, oddly enough, whole, like, Poldark, like, gray area consent rape scene. A lot of the older women did not understand why that was a problem, because they're like, well, it was in the books. That's how it would have been back then. I'm like, you sure about that? Yeah. And I'm like, well, obviously they have to go with the flow of the books because, I mean, they have an author's estate to follow and all that. But I'm like, yeah, this is a problem. And I constantly got into fights with people in these groups because they were like, not. And another thing too, on top of that, is they hated the female lead of the show because it's like, oh wait, how dare you say that the wife has a point? I'm like, how dare you defend Imelda? I'm like, what do you mean? And then I got called a lesbian a couple times for defending her. And I'm like, what? I'm like, what is happening here? Not that that's even an insult. I'm like, what? I also think all of those learning that like how people hide what they really want to say and like how people frame arguments has actually prepared me for more recent things. If you look at Outlander and how Outlander develops and how Outlander, the fandom reacted to like changes the books and made to the TV show, there's a lot of similarities with Bridgerton. So like between Outlander and Poldark, it has actually, both of those prepared me for Bridgerton. But of course, there's one step in between. Hamilton fandom. And older white people react to Hamilton.
I still, my current children, when they looked in the history books, they were shocked, and I'm being so serious. They were shocked that the founding fathers were white. They were like, "What is this?" Like, they had no idea. That's how I was.
Tommy J.
So the reason why I mentioned Hamilton, because Hamilton actually is important for another factor in terms of like the way people talk about Bridgerton, the costume issues. Like, I went on Facebook one day trying to figure out how, like, what patterns are used for the Hamilton costumes, and people were feeling a kind of a way about, you shouldn't make costumes from Hamilton, they're wrong. But I'm like, but wait a second, you work at a museum. I'm just gonna go to Comic-Con. And I've seen other people asking these questions and they get thrown out of these groups. So I was like, look, the Bridgerton people are doing the same thing. When people want to ask, like, I want to look like Kate, I want to look like, y'all are doing the same thing right now. When people want to ask about Penelope's outfits. So that's where writing about the pitfalls of Outlander in season 1 of Bridgerton is what really prepared me for this current discourse. And also seeing people immediately being nasty about the race bending and harassing actors of color online and all that. Like, I was ready because of all the previous experience. And then, of course, a little thing in between Bridgerton season 3, there's the Sanditon fandom. Sanditon.
Oh, fandom. Yeah. I was going to bring up Sanditon too, because that was also an interesting one as well to me. Bridgerton.
I don't have earrings, but I'm like taking them off.
I mean, it's interesting. So we were talking Bridgerton, Sanditon, and Miss Scarlet and the Duke, for me, are kind of like all in the same package. Yeah. They all came around the same time.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note too that 2 of those shows are Masterpiece PBS shows, and I have a sneaky feeling Masterpiece was not ready for the fandom aspect of it. They were ready to tell people to watch the show. They were ready to, like, you know, fundraise and stuff, but I've met a bunch of the Masterpiece folks now through freelancing, and they really don't know the Wild West. That is a job.
I mean, that was clear to me.
All 3 of them have attracted an audience that is not used to romance narratives. And in the case of Miss Scarlet, I would argue that the romance was probably a second or tertiary thought to the script.
I agree that I think the show creators, the romance aspect was a secondary or tertiary thought. The problem was the chemistry between Stuart Martin and Kate was like explosive from the first episode. Yeah. I mean, that man growled all the time. Okay? Yeah. And so, like, I imprinted on that show, and he's left the show now. Like, they announced in the end of the last season that he was not coming back, which is, you know, like, I think the fandom that it gained through the romance, I think, is now gone, which is sad. But, like, to me, those 3, like, Theo James in the Sanditon first season, also just, that man was, like, climbing on top of carriages. I mean, on the run to Gretna Green, it was giving us everything.
Yeah, so the people who are now realizing that Bridgerton fandom is a problem, like, yo, this has been a conversation for a while on multiple levels. I mean, so, like, by the time everybody was harassing Reggae for being ungrateful, I was like, no, this conversation's been done. Been there, done that. Yeah. It's now extra nasty because of race. But, like, I call it the period drama male actor. When they have to, like, leave the period dramas, I call it witness protection.
Yeah.
Witness protection.
Yeah, they have to just be.
And now there's a new one for Bridgerton witness protection, because clearly people have been awful and horrible to pretty much all the actors of color. I mean, there's reports last year, I think, Rue Barker, who played Marina, said that they drove her to suicidal ideation because they were harassing her on Instagram and TikTok.
So did you find, I mean, I have a question given, like, one of the episodes we've talked about is Queen Charlotte. The woman was the person of color. Like, have you found that, like, the discourse, let's say, with Queen Charlotte and perhaps even season 2, where it was Simone Ashley and Jonathan Bailey, like, did you find it different than season 1, where the lead was like a man that was a person of color? Did you find
there's a couple of through lines through all the seasons, and then there's a couple of differences. For season 1, I think a lot of the like anti-Bridgerton discourse came from the fact that people were expecting a white man to play the Duke.
Correct.
People were not really expecting that, and then people were sad when he decided, you know what, I have other opportunities, I'm gonna pursue them. You know what, I'm gone. And then women, I feel like there was a certain type of fan who found wish fulfillment through Simon, and then they could not let that go. And of course, I think a lot of the people who were not happy season 1, obviously, because the whole Simon Daphne rape dynamic was not fixed in the show, although it looks like people might have wanted that fixed, and maybe it's likely that Quinn and other people pushed back on that. So there was mostly that commentary around season 1, but a lot of people were like, well, I like season 1, let's see what happens next. Season 2 to me was more divisive for 2 reasons. Number 1, you had a lot of people, the love triangle factor, which was extended through the books. Number 2, the fact that Simone, Ashley, and Charitha Chandran were getting like pitted against each other in terms of promotion. And people not realizing on Charitha's side that she's not the lead, she's the antagonist, because people really thought she was the lead. Right. I think mixed into that discourse with all the usual racism was a lot of, when I would look at stuff from like other people of color, there was a lot of interesting like caste stuff in there because you're South Asian. I'm like, this is looking a little weird to me as an American. I'm like, that's not my area, but this looks like y'all hate each other. And I didn't quite. It wasn't so wild, but later somebody explained to me that apparently Simone Ashley comes from was like a self-starter, and then Charitha's like family's more well connected in England. So like there's a lot of like not just the like caste system and the caste stuff and then class stuff in England as well. So like it was like, and then I think some of Charitha's friends who I think who were already in the industry felt like the fans were hating on her, but it's not that. They didn't realize, they didn't read the books. They're like, Simone's the lead, Kate's the lead, and then a lot of discourse around season 2 turned into they ruined our characters because we don't get enough Kate and Anthony screen time. And that has continued into season 3 in terms of critiques on the show, along with your usual racist nonsense. And then, of course, you have the folks who... what I found interesting about Queen Charlotte was that there was less fandom discourse in terms of everything except Lady Danbury's backstory. Like, I noticed the Bridgerton fandom was pretty okay with it. Probably less because you know what it is, most of that material is not in the books. It was all Shonda, and it was,
right.
It was all
this is like a Shonda created.
It was all Shonda. Yeah. It was all because Lady Danbury was just the like stern older mother figure in the con. In most of the books, she really didn't have a lot of plot other than getting angry at people and like banging her cane. Because by the time the later books in the series, Queen Charlotte is deceased historically.
Yeah. Right.
Yep.
But like, so that's the other thing too. Bridgerton has a kind of a timeline problem in that regard as well. Because at some point she's gotta go. She's gotta go. Well, we'll see. And so is her husband. So like, I think Queen Charlotte was less drama because people are already, I mean, yes, you have your usual bad gaggle of racists being annoyed, but I'm like, there was not much of the Bridgerton canon plot line to really be angry about because most of that was all history or Shonda just adding stuff in the whole explaining how racism works in Bridgerton society. People are like, okay, fine, this is not really. I think Queen Charlotte's kind of a calm period fandom, oddly enough.
Except for the interesting. I had not thought about it.
Except for the Lady Danbury storyline, which I could see why people had problems with it because people felt like it was a lot of trauma on a darker skinned actor.
Yeah.
Of course, in my POV, I kind of agree with that, but I also feel like, historically speaking, setting up the fact that women would have been in these awful arranged marriages is kind of important because it drops people's motivations on a marriage market. And I think yet. I mean, I could see where people would have wanted a change on that, or like just thinking that like she, you know, should have had like an epic romance as well. But I think
it's such. I mean, I'm sorry, just to say, like, to me, Lady Danbury is like such a Shonda Rhimes, Olivia Pope type of character, like an
She's
operator.
a fixer.
An operator. You know what I mean? Like, she gets in the room and she fixes the problem.
Yep.
And to me, like that, because she is clearly, to me, like, even in the seasons that are kind of based on Julia Quinn's work, to me, like, Lady Danbury is like a Shondaland plant. Like, you know what I mean? But because it was her own season, like, to me, it made complete sense that Lady Danbury's story was what it was, because it was like straight out of Shonda Rhimes' head.
Where people are not fine now is this season, because here's something to keep in mind. Bridgerton has switched showrunners.
That's right.
So
what does that mean for the? Okay, you're about to say that probably.
So Chris Dewson made the first 2 seasons, and then he moved on to the projects, and now Jess Bronnell, who has also worked on previous Shondaland material, has not stepped in, and she clearly has a different vision for the books than I think people intended. But I also believe, to me, in some regards, this was the direction that people who did not read the books were already kind of anticipating. So, like, for example, to now we're going to be in spoiler land. Spoiler.
Okay.
Just saying.
Just everyone, we're about to get into spoilers. Turn it up.
So there are some arguments about, I'm going to leave Penelope and Colin aside for a hot second. So where people are mad about, honestly, is the fact that none of the Bridgerton books, in terms of main characters, nobody's queer.
Right.
No one. Let's keep that in mind.
The Bridgerton the show fandom.
In the Bridgerton fandom, there is a large section of people who've read the books before, so they're expecting the books to play out on screen exactly as they were written.
Correct.
Yeah.
And this is a huge problem for Shondaland, knowing that we are in 2024. People are going to want to see themselves on screen. I also believe that Jess Bronnell self-identifies as queer. So, like, this is the thing. The people running the show are not the purists book canon fans. Let go of, she assigned the, like, creative control over the characters. Like, she advises, but she's not in charge of the production.
And she's been very open about, like, she has no control and is, like, happy to see some of the storylines brought to a more modern audience, even if that means, you know, some characters being queer.
I argue, like, to an extent, there is some book canon storylines I wish they'd feature, because I feel like for example, the Smythe Smiths, like, their parties are always where, like, the couple drama happens, and I
actually thought in that episode when they're at the party and there's a violin quartet, I was like, are these the Smythe Smiths?
Yeah, like, season 2, they kind of make a reference to musical and they drop that immediately. I was like, y'all, all the couple drama later on happens there. Now, but of course, that's never what people complain about.
Yes.
No, what they do complain about is, oh no, the guy I was picturing in my head is now a woman. Knows that breaks fantasy. So Benedict, people were already annoyed at seasons 1 and 2 about him possibly being hinted at as queer. There were some fans who did not read books who thought at one point that Benedict and Eloise were a couple. I'm like, no.
Sis.
I mean, you can Game of Thrones the fiction. I don't think that's what's happening here. Sorry.
I think that's AO3. It's fine. We're fine.
AO3, okay? Keep that to AO3. We're good. So people were already kind of annoyed about that because they're like, well, what happens to his future spouse? Yeah. So this season, it is very obvious that the homophobia is also mixed with misogyny, because now we know that Benedict, according to, there was Luke Thompson's interview where he calls him pansexual. So clearly Benedict is now pansexual. Bridgerton doesn't always like to completely follow real history. So I'm like, in terms of like, plausible
or not at all.
Like,
yeah,
plausible.
Like, it's really actually still happening in Bridgerton's world. Like, in
kind of not, because like for example, they still don't really have fleshed out Napoleon and the wars.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think it's like a
is it
liminal
happening?
space.
How is Colin traveling in the middle of the wars or just after the wars?
Okay.
But
Right.
we know Maria's boyfriend died in the wars. It's not consistent at all. And
Right.
also they have they've decided not to deal with.
Personally, Queen Charlotte is the season I've enjoyed the most.
Me too. It's hands down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's also one of my favorites because the way they the way Shauna constructed the whole great experiment as well.
I specifically loved I love their love story, but I also love the female friendships. I thought she just gave so much time to really having like really nuanced moments of women being there for women, even like with his mom, the Queen Mother, and Lady Danbury, like that relationship I found so great. And I wonder what other spinoffs could there be that are like Shonda spinoffs.
I would. It looks like she hasn't completely taken off another Queen Charlotte follow up yet off the table. She said that to one of the trade magazines. Where I think a possible spinoff could happen in terms of like maybe I could also see a Violet possibly, although I think they need Violet in the main show because she still has to manage all the unmarried children. Not a Kate
like young Violet.
Violet. So,
and let me ask you just just to say the subtext out loud when we're talking about what these spinoffs would look like and how we could race bend or gender bend or change some aspect or dynamic to make it palatable to folks in the 21st century. When you hear people talking about historical accuracy and costuming and those types of things, like just lay it all on the line. Like, what are people actually saying in your experience? And like, what does that mean? Right?
What does it mean? So I've been working on like, what does that mean for the past couple of years now. Actually, the part before I go out to talk about historical, actually, there's an important piece here before I talk about that. In terms of spoilers for Bridgerton season 3, it's very obvious the meltdown people have had that Michael is now Michaela.
Yeah, goodness, why don't we talk about that?
Right? So the meltdown that has caused, first of all, number one, people who have read the books are now spoiling future season storylines for people, blatantly so. And it is so obvious that reactions are clearly driven not just by homophobia, but misogyny. Because the thing is, that there's clear straight white women in particular are mad that they have lost another male figure they can project their fantasies on. Correct. They're mad that they obviously, but the fact people have jumped immediately to they have ruined the books by trying to be quote unquote woke.
Right.
I'm like, that's a red flag to me because a lot of these people have not complained about Bennett being the same way. The thing is they can fantasize about two men being in a relationship,
right? Because
women are.
It's the internalized misogyny too, like,
and also too. Remember, keep in mind, so far all of Bennett's partners so far have been white, so that's why they don't really care. It would have been more of a problem if he. Yeah, like this is, and also, I mean, there is also a small section of fandom who are also women of color were angry because they thought that Masali Medusa was going to be Sophie. That rumor was kind of now 50% true. I think they were picturing her for Sophie for like, I think like character reasons, but I'm like, okay.
Right now, that cover repackage is gonna be interesting.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting, and also too, I would argue some of those lines about like feeling wicked and stuff like that would
when he was wicked,
that those lines about sin and all that would hit harder on a queer context than straight context. Sorry,
yeah, she would. The yearning when he was wicked is one of her most like steamy yearning. This is bad to do feeling books in the Bridgerton series.
Yeah, right. I mean, we are now. Is possibility they may have to redo a bit about the infertility plot. I know some people were very attached to that, I guess, because they identified with Francesca's struggle in their own journey. I would argue though, this is actually the more problematic bit is like parts that sound like baby trapping, which is kind of weird. and not like. I mean, it's written like some of it. If you look at it now, some aspects of that whole scenario is kind of aged badly.
And those books are old.
They're old. That's the thing. People really not there. They were not just because the covers are new and they're like got the Netflix label slapped on them. Those are very old books. Some of these, the way like these male heroines are written, are kind of problematic, and we have to remove some of that more like problematic. It's actually a good thing for series. Also, it's a good thing to bring in new viewers. With Bridgerton, Bridgerton is a chance to have have happy queer couples, because so far in a lot of period dramas that have been repeatedly criticized by the queer community for just centering only historical trauma, like there's a chance for these folks to see themselves on screen in a happy scenario. Because I don't even think people realize, even like Downton Abbey was heavily criticized for this. Like all of that dialogue has gone all the way back to Downton, at least, if not earlier.
Yeah,
that is only trauma narratives in terms of queer period dramas, and then of course, when there are a lot of the queer and sapphic focused period dramas, a lot of them are based on historical events or like closeted narratives or people being punished for that, and it's overdue to have for queer people have a happy ending. A show like even some things I like like Fingersmith and the Sarah Waters adaptations and the Confessions of Franny Langton still has some kind of trauma in there.
Oh,
also,
yeah.
many of those previous queer dramas also heavily white as well. So it's like finally get the switch up there too.
Long overdue.
Long overdue. I feel like people don't realize. I'm like, just because it's okay if something's not for you.
We talk about this so often about like what happens.
So hard for
and that idea of this something is not for you is actually built into the quote unquote historical accuracy narrative. So the historical accuracy narratives are really because people have learned history 20, 30, 40 years ago. They're watching older period dramas.
Yeah.
So their assumptions of what actually happened in history are wrong.
Completely wrong.
They've learned to whitewash history through their own historical education, through when you're not precise, that's when the dog whistle step in. You know? That's when you're not like specific about like oftentimes another dog whistle used these conversation is low quality. But who is determining quality? It's not the Emmy Awards board. It's some middle-aged white person in Kansas. Another one is poor acting. Again, usually thrown out exclusively on queer and POC people, or characters. I'm like, yeah, that's another example. I'm like, poor acting. I'm like, yeah. That's another red flag. Another one off sometimes depending on who it is too young. Sometimes depending on the cast situation it's too young. I'm like, yeah. So there's never historical accuracy, even when talking about a novel adaptation, doesn't make sense because the author was kind of making too.
Yeah. I mean, in historical accuracy in historical romance specifically is a funny thing and something that has been talked about ad nauseum in romance spaces that like most like how many governesses have married dukes really in history? And not a one.
How many dukes are there, friend?
How many hot ones with all their teeth in their mouth?
Come on.
Not many. And
a lot of these historian type people who make these comments about Bridgerton and other things have not read historical romance.
Right. And I mean, even within the historical romance reading space of like, you know, the fans that are now demanding things be historically accurate. Like,
will read wildly historically inaccurate work if the two main characters are white.
Correct. Like as long as it serves their personal fantasy of like white aspirational, you know, moments of like, of course, the nanny can marry the prince as long as she's white, right? Like as long as it's within their own personal fantasy, it's fine. But if a Black queer woman is now taking, as you said, Amanda, their own personal, their ability to fantasize about that white hero, then there's a problem.
And the thing is, what these people are failing to realize is that the historians that you listen to and revere have been telling you wrong information. Like,
tell them.
And I think I especially hear these complaints, especially from the UK and Europe, because again, it's I think part of anger is that how dare these Americans tell me what I think about my own history, I think.
Frontier is actually adapting source material written by a person of color.
My God. Yeah.
Although I have good news on that front, hopefully, fingers crossed. Beverly Jenkins did get one of her stories optioned.
I did see that. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
I did see
I'm
that.
hoping that means cameras start rolling because it's NBC and John Legend's production company. So
Yes.
funny.
Yes, I
Which
did see
means-
that. It is her contemporary series.
It is
Blessed
contemporary.
series.
That's the only thing.
Yeah.
It's not one historical. I think right now, although somebody should adopt one of her historicals, especially given that like Bass Reeves and Yellowstone is so popular. But I feel there's a lot of, I think, on the Hollywood side, folks are being short-sighted in terms of like where her stuff.
And Yellowstone really is white nostalgia. It is definitely, and I think there's a very specific market given the climate this country is in right now, where white American, pioneer nostalgia is very marketable. And I don't know, and Beverly Jenkins books are not that. They're African American history.
We had the Bass Reeves spinoff. I feel like her books would be perfect in terms of a counter to, in terms of if people want to compete with an audience, like you could go right there, adapt one of her books and just compete with her audience, compete with the Yellowstone people there.
We have somehow been all over history. We have been to Regency, Georgian. We've even actually touched on the West, which is,
Incredible.
We've come full circle.
Yeah. And but I would say for all Bridgerton's imperfections, there's a chance for both authors and screenwriters to do things in a different way or work on, there are things people do, and there's not a space to have both the alternate universe settings and the, quote unquote, I don't like using the word accuracy, but I like to say historical recreation. Yeah, I've been kind of going away from that term and like for a while now because I'm like, it's so obvious it's becoming a dog whistle for like, I hate whatever is happening here and not really analyzing what exactly don't you hate besides, oh no, there's a queer person, oh no, there's a black person.
Yeah. I mean,
and now of course there's gonna be a mini war for this, and literally tomorrow, PBS's little British murder crime drama, village drama, Grantchester. We are now getting a third hot vicar who's not South Asian, and I'm waiting for everybody to be like, well, he sucks because we can't say he sucks because he's South Asian. We're just gonna say he's poorly acted. I'm like, well, you guys ran the guy hated the last white guy that was there because he was a millennial. So like, I have receipts.
I mean that I feel like Grantchester's like another like one of those that I fell off. And probably
I've been Grantchester fan since the beginning. I could have a whole TED talk about how wonderful the show is, and that like how secretly like people don't realize like the British murder drama is hiding a lot of like secret like progressive things. So I'm like, y'all, you are in for a lot.
We probably have to have a season just of cozy mysteries, and we'll have you back on.
We will.
Yeah, we'll have you back on to that.
I love because anything about crime dramas, I don't always cover them, so I can know all the cozy stuff.
It's a date for a full on murder mystery.
Tell us where we can find you so we can actually see those receipts you talk of. We want to see them live, baby. Tell us where.
Obviously, I'm still on the hell site known as Twitter, because I've had it since 2009. It's very hard to let go. So on Twitter, my @ is Amanda-Rea Prescott. I'm a former blue check, and I'm kind of just there still talking about Bridgerton and whatever else I'm working on. So I also have a website, Amanda-Rea-Prescott.com.
Okay.
My entire name. And also I am on Instagram as Amanda-Rea Prescott, but I'm not always checking Instagram. And same with Threads. I am not on the Clock app yet, basically because I'd rather people send me the cat and dog videos.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So
I'm also on Blue Sky as well as Amanda-Rea Prescott because I couldn't fit the whole name. Although I kind of forget to check Blue Sky. But yeah, that's where you can find me on the web for more British TV period drama fun times. I do have some Bridgerton articles coming out. I interviewed the showrunner. It's up on Dead Geek right now. I have one more Bridgerton interview coming on Monday from Dead Geek as well that people are really going to want to look at. I'm just going to let y'all be surprised.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge with us and discussing all of the different pitfalls of the British drama fandom. Thank you so much. We appreciate it so much. And we'll definitely have you back to talk about British mysteries.
All the murders.
Only murders in the podcast.
Only murders in the podcast. Oh, that's a good name.
All right, bye now. Let's talk about Lady Danbury because she was a point of controversy. Like a lot of the think pieces and a lot of the reasons why people were just like, this is detrimental to Black women were expressly about Lady Danbury's storyline. So one of the things that people mentioned was that her young marriage to her husband, and that what she was experiencing was essentially like non-consensual sex pretty consistently over time, and that it was played for a laugh, and that this was like at the expense of this Black body, right? And so people had problems with that, and they had problems with her love interest, and essentially saying that she would choose this to have this affair, right, instead of like going with this other Queen Charlotte's brother, right, and like going that route. And there are a couple of ways I want to think about that critique, but I wanted to like throw it to you first to see what you thought, and then we could just kind of volley back.
Hit me.
The first thing that I thought of when they were describing her experience was, I think what they were doing in Bridgerton was giving a really full-bodied like experience of relationships and marriage, right?
I agree.
I think in the other two Bridgertons, we saw mostly happy marriages, except for maybe like the Duke's dad, mother and father. But even the Duke, loved his wife. He just maybe didn't love his son as much as he should have, right? And so marriage is seen as this kind of unequivocal good for all, and the goal for all of these young people is to get married because marriage is good. And I think Lady Danbury is in this situation to show us that there is an ambiguity about her feelings about motherhood. These are things that everyone kind of universally has to agree are universally for the good of women, right? Marriage and motherhood. And these are the two very things that Lady Danbury is just like, maybe. Cool, but I'm a not.
Yes.
So like she feels ambiguous as a mother. It feels distance from the women who express joy in their marriage. She's just like, you've got to be kidding me. Right? And she represents this person who is can be calculating, but is also inherently realistic about what it means to live a life at that point. So when you talk about her saying, you have to make these choices, you have everyone else's on your shoulder, it's very much because she doesn't live in a world that has idealized these kind of relationships that one has with their spouse and their mother and their child. Like she doesn't idealize any of those things that we're supposed to. And that's why I think those scenes with her and her husband really focused on the de-idealization of marital relations, right? To take literally the rose-colored glasses off of marital relations. I mean, there are people now who are, having relations with spouses, not always out of glee, not always out of desire, right? Not always out of the joy to do so. And so like the idea that her relationship was stripped of the rose-colored glasses is a testament to her character and why she was able to have so much agency. I would argue the most agency in the entire show.
Yeah. I mean, Lady Danbury was a young woman, but was grown. This is a woman who is grown, and she is not trying to play games. She knows
she's not
that she has, like, her life has been compromised from the get-go. She was born to be married off to this man who was wealthy, and she is very good at leveraging her choices and the agency that she gets to secure more agency for herself. And like, that's what she does throughout that entire show. That's what she does. And I think, I mean, absolutely, there were a lot of cringy moments with Lady Danbury in the beginning, in those first 3 episodes of the show. A lot, like, there need to be 5 of those scenes. I can't tell you if that was necessary or not. I could have been, I was good with 1, maybe 2. But
yeah.
But I think the point of it is, and it's like what you said, like beyond just the fact that like, true, it was the reality for some women. It still is the reality for some women. And I think like, I'm not even like, we could get into like, for at that time, like women of color, how they even had proximity to wealth, how they could become like, you know, the lady or the house, like the choices that they had. All of that isn't even like relevant because this is like a fictional world. But I think like it's important to also like show that there's different kinds of relationships. There's different kinds of marriages. Mm-hmm. There are marriages that people make because of practical reasons. And Lady Danbury was a practical woman. And because of that, she was able to shape her destiny and honestly, like influence the destiny of a country, because she was there with the good word for Charlotte when she needed it.
She did the actual work.
Oh, yeah. And told her, like, there's a moment in the show when, like, Charlotte is like, she's had, can we curse in this show? She's had that good dick already at least once. And
we just decided.
And
today.
She is like, you know, sprung. And he is like out there farming on something. He's kind of like checked out. She is like struggling. And Lady Danbury is like, she's like literally has her like face pressed to the window, watching him walk around with no shirt on. And Lady Danbury is like,
golden scene.
It's gold. She's literally like climbing on like a bench. Like Mozart is playing in the literal Mozart is playing in her freaking like piano room, and she's like left the kid and gone to look at the window because he's like out there farming or whatever. And Lady Danbury's like, you have to get it together. Like, you have got to stop looking at this man. You are the queen. You are the first of your kind. Like, he's cute and everything, but you have got to get your shit together. You are just wasting time, and like our titles are in jeopardy here.
Yeah.
And so she is like the one that keeps her in check, because this woman is like, and it's interesting because to Lady Danbury, like the idea that a woman could be so into her husband that she's like not able to focus on the task at hand isn't even a possibility.
She doesn't buy it. She's like, what the hell?
She's like, what is going on with you? Like, you did your duty. You're having the marital relations. And like, what is going on that you're so like in your head? And Charlotte is, of course, like gone for this man. But it's just like, I feel like it was honestly, like, I feel like a beautiful way to kind of like parallel how 2 young women can have such different experiences. And also like the fact that like Charlotte is obviously the queen, but also like lighter skinned. Lady Danbury is like a darker skinned woman. Like, like there was Shonda was doing like double time, triple time with the characterization in that series, to be honest.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Another woman that I wanted to think a little bit about is Princess Augusta.
Another great character.
Another great character, really the kind of architect of the Great Experiment, in a way. Essentially her and Lady Danbury. What did you think that Shonda was doing with this Princess Augusta character? I found her abrasive and compelling at the same time. You knew precisely what she was trying to do, which was placate all of these men while making sure that her son was protected with the kind of science that she knew at the time, right? She wasn't necessarily a fan of Charlotte, but she was doing what she had to do, what she felt to like protect her son.
Yes. I mean, and again, it's a testament to the kind of writer that Shonda Rhimes is that, and for me especially, like when I'm watching a show where there's so many women of color, so many Black women specifically, and there's like one white woman that's coming in with like a Karen energy, like it's very easy for me to immediately like villainize her. You know what I mean? Like this lady's out here to call 911 on the people barbecuing.
She wants to speak to the manager.
She wants to speak to the manager. She wants you to turn off your music.
So she's going to write an angry letter. Absolutely.
And so to me, what was very compelling about her is that she was very clear in her intentions. All she wanted was her son to stay king. And Shonda Rhimes unpacked that for us as we went. Like she gave us like, this woman has been carrying the burden of her son being mentally ill and like being vulnerable to losing his crown, like pretty much since he was born. Her husband died. She was at the mercy of her husband's father, who was terrible. And so she's been carrying this burden for George's entire life and seeing that things are getting worse with him. And so like you could feel her stress. You could feel the urgency for her and her desperation, really. Like you could sense her. And like, I mean, that actress is great. Like the woman who actually played the role, because she was so contained and yet you could sense her like desperation and the stress she was under.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Like, I don't know. I have a favorite moment with her, but I wanted to ask you what if there's a scene with Augusta that like stuck out for you.
Oh, absolutely. It was absolutely when Lady Danbury starts to cry. And she was just like, bitch, are you kidding? Like you can do all the things, but don't do not you and me. You know what I mean? She essentially like pulled down all the curtains to say, this is like, you are my only real peer, you know? And if you pull this, you know, soft belly bullshit, like, what are we doing? Right? So it was, she was like, make your ask and see, like, be strong enough to see if I take it or not. Like, we're doing this. I love this.
That to me is honestly probably like my top 3 favorite scenes in the whole show, because it really boiled down to me what Shonda was doing in that show in terms of offering to us like a view into the lives of women. Like it was like, because Princess Augusta's like, I don't like you, but I respect you and I see what you're doing, and like you are better than to fall apart crying. Like, do not do this. Not here. You are not here to fall apart. You are here to get your goals. Like if you you can't, this is not the moment and this is not the time for you to be crying.
Come on.
She takes out a flask from somewhere, pours some brandy in Lady Danbury's cup, and like, here, have this brandy and get your shit together.
Oh yeah.
Because you like, and it was like, it was a moment of like, we can disagree, but we can be adversaries, but we are after the same goal. And it's like, you get what you want and you get the power to do what you want, and I get what I want. Like, and I love, like, I feel like so much of television that centers women's, or like women going after things, or women with ambition, like, so it like really does this lazy thing of making the women who are powerful and ambitious and focused, like they pit them against each other. And this is one of the few times when like the two like bad bitches, like even when they're like kind of at each other's throats, like there's respect there, and there's like, you can get what you want and I can get what I want.
Yes.
And that to me, again, like honestly, like those two arcs of Lady Danbury and Princess Augusta, I think it's just honestly like such brilliant writing and such brilliant characterization. Like honestly, hats off to Shonda Rhimes, because she truly is the best.
Yeah, yeah. One of the last things I want to ask is essentially about the hero, right? Finally, we're
Let's go to the
you know
romance. Final.
let's talk about the hero. I found this hero extremely empathetic. I felt for him. I wanted his. He was also a person who was incredibly powerful, but was without agency in a real way, and it was almost like Queen Charlotte had like draped over her agents. Like once she found who she was, like she almost like draped him. You know the scene where he runs out in the moonlight. And she gets this blanket and like she puts it over him, and it was like this moment of deciding like I am going to be like for this person, and she found her agency, if only to be his actual agent. I think she was in real life his guardian up until he died, or she died. But
Yes.
that moment of saying like, I'm going to use my agency, and you have actually very little agency despite your position, and I'm going to use my agency to fight for you as well. It's another case of that very thing. And then like for the hero to be the person who needs saving by this woman of agency is something that I felt like it was so soft. It was so vulnerable.
And it was like the kind of like the reciprocity of them, because all she wanted was to be okay, right? Like to be safe. Like, and I think a lot about, especially in this moment, I think that's why historical romance specifically is like a really great vessel right now to explore like what we're feeling as women right now. Like so much of the world feels unsafe again. I mean, it's never felt super safe, but it's feeling particularly precarious right now for us, for our rights, our agency, the things that we like have fought for and won, and like starting to like lose them. And like Charlotte from the beginning, like all she wanted was to be safe, to find someone that wasn't going to hurt her, that to be okay. Like she wanted to be in a marriage where she was safe. And she found that in George. And then George found in her a person to be safe with his mental illness, like the secret that he had been holding for his whole life and really thought was something that no one could love him through. Like he really was so afraid. Like, I mean,
It's the wound.
Yeah. Like the wound, he felt like truly like no one can love me if they know this about me. And the way that she from the first was like, I'm not sure what's happening with him, but he's my husband and I am going to have his back. Like she was his ride or die.
Yeah.
From the get-go.
Yeah. She was. Something that like moved me was if he needs to be mad, let him be mad. Right? Yeah. I mean, I was like, honey, you can have all of me. Okay. I understand, like, because the other option was to see him in agony.
Yes. To torture him. And like, even when at one point also, like, he's like, sometimes I don't even know where I am. Like, my mind is not right. And she's like, well, if you don't know where you are, I will tell you where you are.
I will tether you.
Yeah.
To the earth.
Oh. I will tell you where you are. Like, it's that, honestly, that romance was flawless.
That declaration of love, that was probably one of the best declarations of love I've seen this year. It shook me. I was boo-hooing.
I would say it's one of the best declarations of love I have seen in television. I don't know. I mean, there's obviously the 2005 Pride and Prejudice. Like, that's probably like...
That stammering, I love you, it still gets me. I've seen it so many times, Adriana, but I'm toxic.
It is like unmatched. Let's just leave that in another place. But of like a historical period piece romance, that declaration from George to like my heart calls out your name.
Oh,
my heart
calls your name. and it's just like he's in tears, and she's just like pressing him, like, "Do you love me?" Oh my gosh, I'm getting chills. Like it's.
I've watched
just
it
talking
so
about
many times, and it is just so I mean, and again, I mean, for people out there, if you listen to this and you're trying to write a romance, please watch that series because it is
Give him the tips.
It is a master class in like building the emotion to a love declaration. Like honestly, like honestly, like few I've seen in television, and even like, I mean, there's a lot of great love declarations in romance novels, obviously, but this is one of the best ones I've seen in television. And it's because she really, like, we were really with them, and like both of them as they fell in love, and like seeing all the things. I mean, there were so many genius things that she did in that show. One of them was having us see them get married, and then kind of her, like, him ghost her. He ghosts her in like during the honeymoon, and then comes back, but he's like pissy about it, and then she hears him say something that hurts her feelings, and then we see him kind of like being really evasive, and like we know that something's wrong. Like we know the history. Queen George had mental illness, but then like the fourth episode of the series, it's from his point of view. And what was happening with him in those moments that he was kind of like MIA. And then we see what he's been doing. And then we're like, it's heartbreaking. And then we again go back to kind of like her point of view. So again, a masterclass in POV, a masterclass in like truly centering women. There's like women's friendships. Like I love like the present times, because like the show is in a dual timeline. It's like the past.
Oh yes, that's right. It's also dual timeline. It's
the past, and it's like the present, and it's like Lady Danbury, older, Violet, who's the mom of the Bridgerton kids. She, like, her friendship with Lady Danbury is interesting and complicated, especially because we learned some things about Lady Danbury's past that kind of
get it in, sis.
Complicates the relationship that she has with Violet in some ways. Like even Queen Charlotte, and kind of like one of the like really brilliant things that Shonda does is that Queen Charlotte still dresses like she dressed when she married King George, because she's basically like frozen in time. He wants her
tethering him constantly to a moment.
She wants him to know that it's her, and like that's why she doesn't change how she dresses. It's just honestly like it's just a great romance, and one of those romances where we get the epilogue, because if it would have been a regular romance novel, the book would have ended when they had that last ball, where they had the second ball, and like everything's great, and she's pregnant again, and like everything's beautiful. Like he seems like he's okay, but then we get like the present, and we see how their love story kind of like unfolded through the years. And even though things are not perfect at all, they still love each other.
Yeah, and it's still beautiful.
And it's still like the last 10 minutes of that show, the way I cried.
Like something was hurting me.
Sobbed.
Like kids came in, "Mom, are you okay?"
Dry heaves.
I'm more than okay.
Yes, dry heaving. Like dry heaving. It was truly, truly, truly like, it was just beautiful. It was beautiful. And I really do believe that it made such an impact on me because it was told, I think, really, really trying to center the lives of women, but specifically Black women. I really do believe that that's what made the big difference for me.
Absolutely agree. I mean, and if we're summing up our experience with Queen Charlotte and like making that bridge between like what we know about romance or romance culture, I would say the triumph of Queen Charlotte was its ability to fixate on like a marginalized person, marginalized community, and like turn her experience into a universal experience.
Yes.
So often it's the opposite, right? Where like the white experience is seen as a universal experience, and then like people of color kind of getting where they fit in. Like we're reading Jane Austen and like kind of imagining that, that this could be the other way. But what she did was reverse that, turn that inside out, and say that this person of color's experience is a universal experience as well. And that to me is the genius of Queen Charlotte. There probably wasn't a woman who watched that didn't say, she is like me.
Yes. And I mean, again, like, yes, exactly. I don't have nothing more to add other than I agree. It really truly is. And the universal experience that still focuses on the collective, like a one person's experience can still be grounded in your own safety and your own well-being, and you can still be able to think about the greater good.
Come on.
You see how she did that? You see what Shonda did there?
Yeah, I see what she did. Do you have any recommendations for people who still want to vibe this hard and this well? Any books that come to mind for you?
Yes. I actually just reread Forbidden by Beverly Jenkins, which is one of my favorite romances
Beverly Jenkins
ever. Yes. And I hadn't read it in a couple of years. I listened to it like in a day, like this week. And I would recommend that one because that, like, just to give like a little, I mean, like if you read the back copy, you'll know, like it's a man, Ryan Fontaine, and he is like, his father was a slave owner. His mom was a slave, and he is light skinned. So he decides to, he's passing. He has like crossed the collar line, and and this is like 18, like, it's like in the middle of like when Reconstruction is starting to like fragment.
Yeah.
And so there's like a real conversation going on. I mean, first of all, Beverly Jenkins is a freaking genius. Like nobody
she really is.
Renders real history in a romance novel the way that this woman does it. Like every time I read one of her books, I am in awe of her skill.
Forbidden is top tier.
It is top tier. One of my favorite old-time romances of any subgenre. It is. I've read it so many times, and every time I'm like, she is literally a freaking genius. But anyway, there's so much context here, like I think connected to also like what Shonda did with Queen Charlotte in terms of like, this is a critical moment in the race. Like this is a critical moment in the race, and you have to pick your sides, and you got to do your job.
Yep.
And in Forbidden, it's the same thing. Like Ryan has I'm living as a white guy, but I'm helping out the Black community. Like I'm a good guy, but I'm like white, so like I'm here, and he has a lot of privileges. He is able to like maneuver a lot of things, but he has to like. He comes to the realization that he has to he can't continue to live in both worlds. So it's anyway. Yeah. I think it's a book that is it's a similar vibe in terms of everything that it's negotiating and the community piece and the piece of the collective, especially because like there was a time when like the Republican Party was really compromising so that they could, bring in the white people that were like disgruntled and all of this stuff that is happening right now. And so anyway, Forbidden by Beverly Jenkins is one of my recommendations. It is
genius.
A freaking brilliant book.
Genius. I'm also going to do a historical that I absolutely loved, the Diana Quincy series. Her historicals are incredibly steamy, but they also deal particularly well with race. And what I love about her Regency is that all of her heroes or heroines are from different classes. So some of them are dukes, but some of them are like merchants or even lower. Like one of them was like a bone setter.
Yes, right? I love that bone setter romance.
That was good. And so she deals very kind of explicitly with race and the issue of being kind of Arab in that time, right? So I think it's analogous to the story of like how one becomes accepted in this. And it's like you have to somehow erase who you are to be accepted. And that was the thing that her heroines are always pushing up against. Like, I can't actually be Arab, right? And be accepted in this space. And they're moving outside of the ton and the aristocracy to kind of find their happiness, and then making changes on the aristocracy and forcing them to kind of change the way they think. And I think that's really similar. And it's so steamy. It's so spicy.
Her books are super spicy, super smart. They always have these like super interesting professions. Like she has one that's like a map maker too. Like, she has really great. Diane Quincy is great to read. She is a phenomenal historical romance author, and it's all her heroines are Arab, and some of her heroes too. So it's also top tier romance.
Fantastic. Good choices. Good talk.
I know. It was a great talk. I love that we're doing this.
We hope you can join us bi-weekly on Unbound and join our conversation. Thanks for riding with us.
Your thoughts and stories are the lifeblood of this exploration, so we invite you to engage with us. Share your insights, your favorite moments, and the romance narratives that have touched your life. Find us all on all major podcast platforms and follow us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram for updates and behind-the-scenes contents. Until next time, keep your hearts unbound.